They say greed reveals who you really are. But no one tells you what happens when greed listens back. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this is not just a story. It's a confession. We went looking for gold. We found something older than sin. The story begins on a rainy night in October, a month that always seemed to hang heavy with superstition in my small coastal town of Raven Hollow. I was sitting in my late grandfather's study, surrounded by the scent of old tobacco and the faint whisper of storm wind against the windows. He had been gone for almost 3 months, but his presence clung to the room like the stale air of a forgotten cellar. That night, I wasn't supposed to be there. My mother had forbidden it. She said the house was cursed, that strange things had happened since the funeral. Lights flickering. Doors unlocking themselves. My name whispered from the attic. But curiosity, it's a sickness that digs deeper than fear. Grandfather was a historian, a treasure hunter of sorts. He traveled the world chasing myths and half-truths. But one obsession followed him to his grave, the legend of the Blackwell treasure, a stash of Spanish gold said to be buried somewhere along the cliffs of Raven Hollow. I never believed it was real. Not until I found the map. It was hidden inside a false panel behind his old bookshelf. The paper was scorched at the edges, brittle as dried leaves. Across the top, written in what looked like faded blood, were the words, "He who seeks must first suffer." The map itself showed a stretch of coastline shaped like a broken jaw, marked by 5 strange symbols, an hourglass, a dagger, an eye, a hand, and a spiral. At the bottom, my grandfather's handwriting. Only when the tide swallows the moon will the path reveal itself. I should have stopped there. Burned it. Walked away. But there was something, an itch in my skull, like the map was whispering directly to me. That night, I called my 2 oldest friends, Eli Parker, a thrill-seeking marine biologist who believed every myth had a scientific explanation, and Marla Quinn, a local journalist always chasing her next headline. They both agreed instantly. Eli laughed and said, "You're talking about pirate gold, Danny. Who says no to that?" We met the next morning at Blackwell Cove, the stretch of beach where the cliffs bit into the sea. The air was sharp, the wind carrying the cry of gulls that sounded more like warnings than calls. The map led us through brambles and fog until we reached a hollowed tree shaped like a screaming face, the first symbol, the hourglass. Inside, carved deep into the bark, was a countdown. 3 days until the tide. Marla ran her fingers over the grooves. "Your granddad wasn't just eccentric, Dan. This feels ritualistic." Eli scoffed. "Or maybe he was just dramatic. Treasure hunters love a good show." But I wasn't so sure. The closer I looked, the more I realized the map wasn't drawn on paper, it was drawn into something that felt like skin. That night, when I returned home, I placed the map on my desk and turned off the lights. In the glow of the storm outside, I swear I saw it move. The spiral symbol pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat under the surface. Then came the whisper. Low. Male. Familiar. Finish what I started. I turned, but the room was empty. Only the map lay before me, curling at the edges as though alive. The rain outside grew heavier, pelting the window like fingers tapping to be let in. And just before the thunder drowned it out, I heard it again, this time behind me, closer. "The tide will come, and you will feed it." A flash of lightning reveals a reflection in the glass, not mine, but my grandfather's face, smiling. The next morning, the sky was the color of dull steel. No sunlight, no warmth, just that heavy kind of silence that makes you feel like the world's holding its breath. Eli, Marla, and I met at the cliffs again, following the map's second symbol, the dagger. It was carved into a cluster of stones shaped like a broken cross. Beneath it, etched deep into the rock, were words none of us could fully read. It looked like Latin, but the edges of the letters seemed to shift if you stared too long. Custos sanguinis. Apparitor cum hostia. Eli pulled out his phone and ran a quick translation. "Guardian of blood, will open with a sacrifice," he said, laughing nervously. "Probably just pirate dramatics." Marla frowned. "Pirates don't write in Latin, Eli." We all tried to laugh it off, but it didn't stick. The cliffs dropped sharply into the churning waves below. According to the map, the second mark was somewhere near the base of that rock formation, an opening that only revealed itself when the tide fell low. So we waited. Hours passed. The sound of the waves became hypnotic, a rhythmic crashing that felt more alive than natural. And when the water finally receded, the sand beneath shimmered, not with gold, but with bones. Hundreds of them. Tiny, bleached fragments, as if the tide had chewed them up and spat them out. Marla whispered, "Animal bones?" Eli bent down to check. "Too small for that." "Maybe, fish?" But I knew they weren't fish. The shape of the tiny skulls, the sockets, were unmistakably human. Infants, maybe. Or something worse. We found a half-buried wooden chest just a few feet beyond the bones. The lock was rusted, and a strange black mold crawled across its surface like veins. I hesitated, but Eli already had his knife out. "Let's see what your granddad left behind," he said, forcing the blade between the hinges. The chest opened with a sigh, like something exhaling after years of waiting. Inside was a glass jar filled with murky red liquid, and floating inside it, a key. Only, it wasn't metal. It looked like bone, carved with spiraling symbols that matched the ones on the map. Marla covered her mouth. "Is that human?" Eli finished. "Could be. Looks old though." When I touched it, the air around us shifted. The waves suddenly went silent, as if the entire ocean was listening. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it, the same whisper I'd heard the night before. "He who seeks must suffer." It came from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around us like cold smoke. Eli dropped the jar, and the bone key hit the sand with a sharp crack. The liquid inside soaked into the ground, turning the sand dark as ash. Marla backed away. "Dan, we should go." But I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the key. It was sinking, as though the ground itself was swallowing it. Without thinking, I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched it, pain shot through me, cold, ancient pain that burned like frostbite under my skin. I screamed, but it wasn't my voice I heard. It was his. My grandfather's. "The path is open, Daniel. Do not fail me." The cliffside trembled. Cracks tore through the rock where the dagger symbol had been. Sand and bones shifted as something below began to stir. The water surged back faster than the tide should have allowed, pulling at our feet, dragging us toward the opening. Eli grabbed my arm. "Run." We scrambled up the slope, the roar of the sea behind us like an angry animal. I looked back just once, and saw a shape rising from the foam. Not quite human, not quite shadow. Its body shimmered like oil, its face a blur of screaming mouths. The voice followed us all the way up the path. "You cannot flee the tide, Daniel." By the time we reached the top, the map in my pocket was warm, pulsing against my leg like a heartbeat. I pulled it out. The second symbol, the dagger, was now bleeding red ink. Marla stared at it, pale as bone. "What the hell is happening?" I didn't answer. I just looked at the next mark on the map. The third symbol, the eye, was drawn right over an old well in the forest near my grandfather's property. We decided to rest before investigating. But that night, as I tried to sleep, I heard scratching at my window. When I finally turned on the light, nothing. Except for the wet footprints leading from the window to my desk. And there, resting neatly beside the map, was the bone key. Still glistening with salt water. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, the rhythmic slosh of waves where there shouldn't be any, echoing through my room like the sea itself was breathing inside the walls. And always, beneath that sound, the whisper of my grandfather's voice. "You've opened the path, Daniel. Now finish it." When morning came, the air outside was unnaturally still. Even the gulls were silent. Marla and Eli showed up just after sunrise. Neither of them had slept either. Marla's eyes were red from crying. She'd told me over the phone that something had followed her home. "It was in my mirrors," she'd whispered. "Every time I blinked, it got closer." Eli brushed it off as stress, but the way his hands shook told me he was starting to doubt his own words. The map led us deep into the forest that bordered my grandfather's land. We followed a narrow trail littered with fallen leaves until we reached an ancient stone well, half-collapsed and covered in moss. It was the third mark, the eye. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe an artifact, a clue, anything logical. But when I leaned over the edge of the well, I didn't see my reflection. I saw the ocean. Deep, dark, endless. Waves rolling in a place that shouldn't exist. Eli looked too, his breath catching. "It's moving. That's not possible." Marla backed away. "Dan, I'm not going near that thing." The wind picked up suddenly, howling through the trees, carrying with it the scent of salt and rot. The water in the well began to churn, though there was no source to move it. Then something rose from the darkness, an eye. Vast, lidless, and milky white, staring straight up at us. It blinked. Once. And the ground shuddered beneath our feet. Marla screamed and stumbled backward. Eli, driven by some mix of curiosity and madness, tossed a flashlight down the well. The moment the beam hit the surface, it vanished, not sank, not flickered, vanished, as if swallowed by the pupil itself. That's when the voice came again. Not a whisper this time, but a guttural growl that rattled the stones. "Blood for passage." Eli turned to me. "It wants a sacrifice." "Like the carving on the cliff," I said. "Guardian of blood." Marla shook her head, trembling. "We're not doing this, Dan. We're done." But before we could decide, Eli took a step forward, pulling a pocketknife from his jacket. "If it's blood it wants," he said, forcing a grin, "I'll give it some. Just a drop." I shouted for him to stop, but it was too late. He sliced his palm open and let the blood drip into the well. The forest went dead silent. Then the earth split open. The well convulsed, and from its depths came a surge of black water that sprayed into the air, carrying with it a sound that didn't belong in this world, a chorus of screams, layered and echoing, like thousands of voices crying out in agony. Eli fell backward, clutching his head, shouting, "Get it out! Get it out!" His eyes rolled back, and he began to convulse. Marla rushed to him, but the water splashed against her arm, and her skin began to blister instantly, as if it were burning from the inside. I grabbed her, dragging her away from the edge. The water receded as quickly as it had erupted, leaving behind only silence and the faint echo of laughter, my grandfather's laughter. Eli lay motionless. The ground beneath him was wet, not from water, but from something thicker, dark red and steaming. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the canopy above. And carved into his chest, freshly and deep, was a symbol I recognized, the spiral from the map. Marla sobbed. "He's gone, oh God, Dan, he's gone." But even as she said it, Eli's mouth twitched. Slowly, painfully, his lips parted, and in a voice that wasn't his own, he whispered, "One must fall, so the rest may see." Then his body went limp again. The bone key in my pocket grew warm, almost burning. I pulled it out. It was glowing faintly, and the symbols on it had rearranged themselves into a spiral. Marla looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "We have to destroy it." But before I could answer, the map, still in my other hand, shifted. The ink bled across the parchment, forming new words beneath the third mark. The hand will guide you home. The fourth symbol. Marla didn't want to go. She wanted to call the police, the church, anyone. But I couldn't stop. I felt drawn, pulled by something ancient and irresistible. By nightfall, we left Eli's body beneath the trees. I don't know if it was guilt or fear that made me cover him with my jacket, but I whispered an apology before walking away. As we neared the edge of the forest, the wind carried a faint voice. His voice. "You opened it, Danny. Now finish what you started." And for a moment, I could swear the trees were breathing. The forest followed us. I don't mean the trees walked. I mean their sounds did. Every step Marla and I took away from that well, we heard the same whispering leaves and creaking branches echoing right behind us, as if the woods themselves refused to let us go. When we reached the clearing near my grandfather's property, the sun was long gone, hidden behind a churning sky that looked like bruised flesh. The ocean was roaring in the distance. The tide was rising again. I looked down at the map, only 2 marks remained. The hand, and then the spiral. Eli's death still clung to us like smoke. Marla hadn't spoken since we left his body. She was pale, shaking, muttering under her breath like she was trying to pray but had forgotten the words. When we arrived at my grandfather's house, something was off. The front door stood wide open, creaking gently in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of salt water and decay. There were footprints, wet, heavy, leading from the doorway to the study. We followed them, even though every instinct screamed not to. Inside the study, the fire was already lit. But I hadn't lit it. Neither had Marla. And sitting in the chair by the hearth was a figure. At first, I thought it was my grandfather's body, maybe exhumed by some cruel force of nature, but then it moved. Slowly. Unnaturally. Its head turned toward us, and I saw that it wasn't him, not anymore. His skin was gray and stretched too thin, his mouth full of seawater that dripped onto the floor. His eyes were black pools reflecting the firelight. "You came home," he rasped. Marla screamed. I froze. He raised one hand, bony, trembling, covered in the same black rot that had crawled across the treasure chest at the cliffs. And in that hand, he held a small wooden box carved with the symbol of the hand. "The offering is incomplete," he said. "The hand feeds the tide. The blood seals it." The room darkened. The fire dimmed to a dull red glow. I could hear the waves crashing closer, as if the sea itself were moving toward the house. Marla grabbed my arm. "Dan, please, we have to end this." But something inside me broke. Then. It wasn't fear, it was understanding. This wasn't a treasure hunt. It never had been. The Blackwell treasure wasn't gold. It was a door. The curse wasn't on the map. The map was the curse. I stepped toward the box. My grandfather, or the thing that wore his face, smiled. "Blood for passage, Daniel. Yours or hers. The sea will take one." Marla backed away. "No. No, Dan, don't listen to it." But I could feel the pull now. The bone key burned hot in my pocket, and the sound of waves grew deafening. The floor began to tremble. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the whispers returned, thousands of them. "Finish what he started. Feed the tide. Open the gate. The next part is hard to remember." I remember Marla crying. I remember the knife, my grandfather's old one, lying on the desk. I remember the map unfurling itself, glowing with veins of red light. And then, screams. Her screams. When I opened my eyes, the room was filled with seawater up to my knees. Marla was gone. The map had changed again, the fourth symbol, the hand, now dripped red ink that spread across the paper in spirals, forming the final mark. The spiral, the center of everything. The house was shaking apart. The walls bled saltwater. I could hear the ocean roaring outside, closer than it had ever been, swallowing the land. Then I saw it, the door behind the fireplace. I had never noticed it before, but the flames parted like curtains, revealing an old iron hatch engraved with the spiral. I took the bone key and inserted it into the lock. It turned by itself. The hatch burst open, and seawater flooded the room. But it wasn't just water, it was filled with faces. Dozens. Hundreds. Screaming, writhing faces, dragging themselves toward me through the tide. In their eyes, I saw Eli. I saw Marla. I saw my grandfather. And behind them, something immense. Something ancient. A shape that blotted out the light. A god of the deep, its form coiling like a serpent made of storm and bone. It spoke, not with words, but with the sound of the tide itself. You have opened the path. The sea remembers. The debt is paid. The last thing I felt was the water closing over my head. The cold was endless. The darkness, eternal. And then, silence. When I woke, I was lying on the beach. The storm had passed. The sky was a flat gray, and the tide had retreated far beyond the cliffs. My grandfather's house was gone, washed away. Beside me, half buried in the sand, was the map. The symbols were gone now. All that remained were two words written in my own handwriting: "It's never over." As I stood, I noticed something strange. My right hand, it wasn't mine anymore. The skin was pale, almost translucent, with faint symbols pulsing beneath it like veins. And when I reached toward the sea, it whispered back. That was 3 years ago. Since then, the tide has risen higher every season. People vanish near the cliffs. Fishermen talk about seeing faces in the waves. And me? I still hear the ocean calling. Every night. Because once you feed the tide, you belong to it. Finish what he started.